This topic is part of the practical paper of geography honors in the undergraduate syllabus. So first we need to know what are the types of data. So these are the three types of data. So this is an example of a simple series data. This is an example of a simple frequency data. Next we have an example of a group frequency data. So for any type of statistical calculation, we need to first classify the data. For that, we need to follow the 4 steps which are given. Firstly, from the given data, we need to identify the highest and the lowest value. Secondly, we need to find out the range of the data, that is the difference between the highest and the lowest value. Third, we need to find out the number of classes or the groups into which we will classify the data. So for that we use a formula which is a Sturges formula, which is 1 plus 3.3 log n, where n is the number of observations. Fourthly, we need to determine the class interval. That for that we need to divide the calculated range by the number of classes. So after performing these 4 steps, our classification is complete. Next we need to tabulate the data. We need to put the given data into the number of classes which we have chosen or we have selected for tabulating, for classifying the data. After classifying the data into different classes, we will get what is known as the frequency. So by this we can convert a simple series data into a group frequency data. Now we need to know what is an attribute and what is a variable. Suppose there is a given table, all the qualitative things that are given, that are attribute, and the numbers or quantities are variable. So this is an example of an attribute and variable. And we must know what is an attribute and variable to analyze any type of data, to understand any type of data. Now we have already talked about classification and tabulation of data. Now for classification of data, we have talked about the classes. So technically there are 2 types of classes, class limits and class boundaries. Now what are class limits and what are class boundaries? Class limits, if we simply go by the term, they are nothing but discontinuous classes. Why they are discontinuous? The example given will clearly explain that. That is 10 to 19, 20 to 19, 30 to 30. So there is a gap or is a break in the class. So they are discontinuous groups. Then in case of class boundaries, we have continuous classes. That is 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. There is no break. So we have continuous classes. Now, if we want to find out the class interval, first we need to identify which is the lower class limit and is the upper class limit. Suppose this is a class limit 10 to 19. 10 is the lower class limit, 19 is the upper class limit. And by subtracting the lower class limit from the upper class limit, we will get what is known as the class interval. Now, the class interval for this particular class, that is 10 to 19, is 10. Why it is 10? It is because of the fact that if we count from 10 to 19, we will get 10 values. These are all mutually exclusive classes. But in case of class boundaries, if we subtract the lower class boundary from the upper class boundary, that is, if we subtract 10 from 20, we will get 10, which is technically known as class width. So, what is class interval for class limit is class width for class boundaries. So, these are some technical terms which we need to remember in statistics. So, I have already discussed that 10 to 19, in the 10 to 19 class, 10 is the lower class limit and 19 is the upper class limit. And in the class boundary, there's 10 to 20. 10 is the lower class boundary and 20 is the upper class boundary. We have to convert a class limits into class boundaries. But how can it be done? Suppose this is a data. We have selected two consecutive classes from the given data. That is 10 to 19, 20 to 19, and there were other classes also, 30 to 39. We need to select two consecutive classes. Now, what we will do is that 19 is the upper class limit of the first class and 20 is the lower class limit of the next consecutive class. We will subtract 19 from 20. We will get 1. We will divide it by 2 and we will get 0.5. Now 0.5 becomes constant and this value will be subtracted from each lower class limit of a given class and will be added to the upper class limit of a particular class. For example, in the class 10 to 19, we will subtract 0.5 from 10 and add 0.5 to 19. Then by subtracting 0.5 from 10, we will get 9.5 and by adding 0.5 to 19, we will get 19.5. So we have converted the class limit of 10 to 19 into class boundary of 9.5 to 19.5. And in the class limit for 10 to 19, class limit is 10. In case of class boundary, it is 10 because we subtract 9.5 from 19.5 and we will get 10. That is the class width for the converted class boundary. So we have converted the class limit into class boundaries. In case of some statistical calculation, this conversion is required. So we must know. Now what is class mark or mid value? It is nothing but the summation of lower class limit and upper class limit, the value obtained divided by 2, and in case of class boundary we will add the lower class boundary with the upper class limit and divide the obtained value by 2 and we will get what is known as the class mark or mid value. What is class width? It is nothing but the difference between the lower class boundary and the upper class boundary. If we subtract the lower class boundary from the upper class boundary, we will get what is known as class width. Next, we have another term, that is frequency density. Frequency density is nothing but is obtained by dividing the frequency of a particular class by the class width of that particular class. We will get frequency density, and this frequency density calculation is essential for drawing a histogram with unequal classes. So for that reason, we need to know this calculation also. So these are the some terms which we need to know for our statistical calculations. These are very much essential.